the story, that was taking place on top of a different population of people, the Palestinians, who had lives and homes and orchards and generations of relatives there on that same land. And what we didn't know at the time for all those decades in most of the Jewish community was that actually there had been an intentional ethnic cleansing drive to remove the Palestinians from that land, even by the very hallowed leaders of who were helping birth the Jewish state. We didn't know it. And we didn't know from the Palestinian perspective that 1948 war was considered a catastrophe, where 750,000 Palestinians were uprooted for many different reasons from their homes and never allowed back in. And so that is that same, incredible Independence Day for the Jews was considered the catastrophe, the Nakba, by Palestinians. We didn't know that at the time. This history was hidden from us as we learned the Exodus book and movie version of things. And so I'm wondering, I think many of us have been through all 3 sessions at this point or watched the recording. So it is really kind of a journey together to integrate the things that we didn't know at the time. But since then, many of us have actually learned that history and now have to hold the whole thing in a bigger way that holds Jewish and Palestinian truths and history. And so I want to take some time now. It's a few weeks later since our last class, and it's many weeks later since our first class, just to open it up about with further reflection and more time for that integration. What kinds of what would you like to share at this point about where, how are you doing that integration of new, very difficult material that's just true and is history that we didn't know at the time for many decades? So how is that going for you? Do you have anything you want to share, insight, feeling, and just open it up and I will call on people. Welcome, Beverly, Diane, Louisa, Ed, Phil, Paul. Bobby with an E, you can unmute.
I can say that I feel as adults and seniors that we need to have the courage to face this understanding because our young people in colleges are being thrown and thrust into the middle of a world that they were not prepared for and are bearing the brunt as young people in the hurly-burly of, different groups and all, especially in a college setting. And so I strongly feel as a senior and as an adult that I have to be willing to see these things because they certainly will have to and face it and deal with it. And so all of us together can lift ourselves up to a higher vision.
Thank you, Bobby. And so you see sort of in the role of an elder in the society, you don't want a huge gap between you and the next generations that are coming along with more information and more open eyes. That's powerful. Can you see the screen, Bobby? Would you be able to call on the next person? Or if you can't, I will. I don't know who can see what here. It looks like, okay, now I'll call on somebody. Nancy Axelrod, you can unmute.
Thank you. I'm in a sort of different position than Bobby with me because my youngster who went through Hebrew school and birthright and then did an ulpan in Israel for 6 months. She and I are on opposite sides. We haven't spoken about it in over a year. And I feel that she drank the Kool-Aid and, took in all the marketing and they did a really great job on her. And when I said, well, how about all of these people who are someone's child and someone's brother, they're all dying. And she said, well, they weren't raised right. And that was the last time we spoke about it. So that's my problem. And my question would be, what does it mean to be a Zionist today?
Thank you, Nancy. Patricia and then Louisa.
Yeah, I wanted to react to some discussion we had last time because I was on the go and I couldn't talk about. So we were discussing, the catastrophe for the Palestinian and how they were kicked out of the country in most cases, and also that it was mentioned that. Basically, after World War II and the Holocaust, it was a good opportunity for Zionists to push for the creation of the State of Israel. And that's how it was created in 1948, after decades of trying to have it created. And it was mentioned that there were other options at the time than creating a state for Jews. And I have kind of a different perspective as a European Jew. I think probably, the perception is different from when you were in the US, not tracked down by Nazis or all the supportive regimes in Europe at the time. And I can understand why the survivors at the end of World War II, having seen everything that they witnessed, and still having no country wanting them to go back to their country or going back to ruins or realizing somebody else was living in their house, wanted to go somewhere else and wanted a place where they would be safe and not have to live that again. So I think the perspective and the perception may be a little different if you are a Jew from Europe who went through the war, and if you lived it from the US, or even if you see a lot of survivors that came to the US and have children, and I think the perception may be different. And so I think my perception is a little different. And I don't think there was another solution than creating a state for Jews or a place for Jews to be safe. Then that didn't mean that we had to kick out, Palestinian for that. That's a different, and why that was done. And I think we should discuss it, and reparation and what else can be done today. But having a state for Jews to be safe, I think is very helpful. I also see that from the Jews from France have been moving massively to Israel over the last 10, 15 years, because the perception of anti-Semitism in France has been really high. So there's still a relatively strong community in France, there was, but now I think they are the first European country to make aliyah, as Jews say, French Jews say, to Israel. So sometimes they send, as we heard, they send their kids, and their kids go to school there and study there and then get a job there. And then the parents start, buying a place for when they will retire, and they retire and they move to Israel when they retire. And we have plenty of French Jews that have moved to Israel over the last 10, 15 years because of perception of anti-Semitism in France. So I think for them, it's still really important to have a place where, at least until a year ago, they felt safe.
Thank you.
That's just what I want to say.
Thank you for sharing that. Louisa.
I am not coming on camera today because I'm not feeling great, but what I wanted to say is I don't know if it's the newer version of political correctness that has happened in the world in the past 15, 20 years, maybe even 10 years, or which way it is, but it seems like we're starting to, as they always said, history that you forget is doomed to repeat itself. And it seems that parts of history are starting to repeat themselves sooner rather than later. And it seems that the younger generation is not watching the older movies or the different things that we watched as children to learn about our history and different things, whether it be Exodus, whether it be the story of the Rothschild, and learn about the idea of the ghettos and stuff like that. And that there is always anti-Semitism. There has always been. It never really left. It may have died down some, but it never has really left the Jewish population at all, or many populations, but primarily the Jewish population that I recognize it through. So I think more
the younger generations not getting educated about anti-Semitism and Jewish history.
Right. So therefore, they're not, it seems like they're missing the connection with the past to make the future stronger. And like they're just acting out on whatever they learned the day before in class that may have only been part of the story.
Okay, thank you. Let's keep going so people have a chance to share here. Phyllis and then Ellen.
It's actually Natan.
It's actually Natan, and I just wanted to follow up on the comments about Jews in Europe and Jews in France and the relationship between Israel and the Jewish world, which is the United States, because of its size, is kind of peculiar in many ways. I mean, here we are, part of a very successful imperial colonial settler state, and we're all very happy here with all its own problems. But the sense of integration up to generally has been quite high. But sort of, there was France, sort of looking at a place like, let's say, Argentina, where one of the things that Israel has accomplished for the Jewish world is a sense of normalization. The idea that Jews are like other, in the case of South and Latin America all over, like other ethnic migrant groups. They have their own homeland, and in the same way as all kinds of Argentinians have gone out and gotten themselves Spanish or French or Italian citizenship, not French, Italian citizenship, Jews have in Argentina have tended to get Israeli citizenship, move back and forth between the two countries, same thing in Uruguay, Chile. And this sense that most Jewish communities around the world have fairly tight connections to Israel on a day-to-day family basis that we don't have quite the same here. So when we're talking about the relationship between Jews outside of Israel and Israel itself, we have to, sort of looking at it from outside of the United States, it's different. And I think even in the United States, there are large segments of the Jewish population, not merely all these people who used to live in Israel who now live in the United States, but large segments of the American Jewish community, among the Orthodox, among the immigrants from places like Syria or Iran, that see Israel as central to the Jewish existence in the 21st century. And I think that's something that was kind of tend to be very focused on the United States or around particular slice of the United States when discussing this. That's it.
Thank you. We're going to take just a couple more minutes of comments. Ellen's next, and then we will end with Enid for this round.
Hi, thank you. So this may come out of left field. I spent about 2 years and I continue to volunteer working in the Israel-Palestine space in a cross-border cooperation called Project Rosanna, which is building healthcare diplomacy on the theory that if there is indeed a two-state solution, infrastructure is key to success. And so I was in the healthcare space, which is secondary to sort of the point what I'm making is, for those of you who've been there enough times, the number of organizations working on cross-border cooperation is pretty astonishing. And I'm talking sports, music, medicine, business, education. It's remarkable. How come we never hear about it? What is the information that our young folks are hearing in this country? You never hear about peace building initiatives, those organizations working across the border and at tremendous risk to themselves and to their families but how come we don't hear about those initiatives and what do we hear out of the Middle East? And I'm not saying what's happening is horrific, but what would be so impactful, and perhaps our young folks would be able to listen, is that, yeah, right now it's a mess, but let's talk about all the good things that people are trying to do on both sides of the border to bridge peace between these two nations. And the fact that there's not a single news outlet that has once said anything to that makes you wonder what kind of information the information that's coming through isn't 100% accurate. And I think it's unfortunate. And I think in particular, our young kids, our college students, who are so caught up in the tragedy that's happening might take some happiness or some relief to know that that's not entirely 100% what's happening, and that there's lots and lots and lots of folks on both sides of the border working cooperatively to build a better world. And I, for one, would like to hear some good news coming out of that region every now and again. And the hundreds and hundreds of people on a day-to-day basis putting their lives at risk to do this kind of work. And I'm an old hippie. I love the idea that there's still folks, despite everything, trying to make the world a better place. And I think that's sort of the takeaway. I think that was what the thing about Exodus spoke to me originally, was that until the end of the book, there was this kind of belief that, they'd grown up together, they'd been friends, and maybe there was a way to make it come together. And that to me was the tragedy of Exodus, was that those relationships had been fractured when right there at the beginning was perhaps the time to really work on this. How are we going to live together in this land that we both belong to? There you go. That's my story.
Ellen.
Thank you.
Hey, Enid, you've got a minute.
Okay, well, David wanted to say something first.
Okay, David.
Good evening, good morning. I would like you to comment on the role of the other Arab nations during this period of time, such as Jordan, which built in Jericho a city practically to detain Palestinians so they wouldn't come to Jordan. And also, if you would comment on the Arab leadership during this time, such as the Grand Mufti.
Thank you, David. Okay.
All right, just quickly from my perspective, there's a certain comfort in knowing that there is an Israel, that there is a place where we can go. Having said that, as you know, it's in The Hague. My children were very upset with me going. And the fact that I was going and supported the International Criminal Court, which is a judicial institution. I have my issues with them, and I say what I have to say. But my friend from The Hague insisted upon picking me up at the airport, taking me back to the airport, because she didn't feel it was safe for me to possibly order a car where there could be our driver. I mean, that's how bad things really are. And they see it from a different perspective, as was said before by Patricia, than we do. And it was understandable. But I also spoke to a young Arab NGO. And of course, why doesn't he have the right of return? Just like, we never got further than that. I'm sorry I ever started the conversation, but anyhow. So.
Enid, you've got 10 seconds.
Thank you. I know. I go on. Yeah, so that's, I think they're the issues that we have to look at. And even just quickly, would Syria have happened just now had there not been this war between Israel and Hezbollah?
Okay, we're gonna stop this round there.
Okay.
And thank you, everybody. That was a real wealth of there. So I just want to lift up some of the things that I'm hearing from these reflections. Just the interconnectedness of worldwide Judaism with Israel at this point. That's so true. The different perspectives coming from Europe and South America, because Europe and South America are differently situated, and certainly in Europe, closer to tragedies of the past, like the Holocaust and like, dangerous anti-Semitism. Also, the importance of knowing history, of the importance of us and our young people, like of everybody knowing the full history, not just knowing a piece of the history. And whichever side you know, whichever of the multiple complex sides you know, to also study the other parts of it that you don't necessarily know, for our young people and us. Also, the amount of, there's lots of people doing good work in Israel and Palestine, like good work of like community building, peace building, health things, agricultural things, economic things, educational things, like lots of good work. And we've named some of the groups doing that. We sent out a follow-up email last time. The one I'm close to is Combatants for Peace. There's, in this room, people have lifted up some other ones. So yes, there's a lot of good work happening there. And then, of course, there's the question of how, the other Arab countries and the very complex divisions within the Palestinian and Jewish communities impact things. So all of that, yes. I'm going to say yes to all of that. And thank you for putting it on the table here. And the next question is, how many people before the assignment for this class had ever gone to the If Not Now or Jewish Voice for Peace website to learn more about those organizations? So some people here have checked that out before this assignment. And how many people for this week's class did go check out those websites? Interesting. Okay. So I'm very interested, anybody who has seen it in the recent past or for this class, just right now to collect data about what you saw in order to share it with this group. No interpretation, just like what was there when you went there? What did you, what were the actual facts about what you learned about what each of those groups cares about? And just to situate it, I will say that If Not Now is a non-Zionist Jewish group. It's been around maybe 10 years. For a while, they had the rule that if you were over, I think it was 40. If you were over 40, you couldn't be a member of If Not Now. It was like a young people's movement about Judaism in a way that was not Zionist, not anti-Zionist, just not Zionist. So in other words, it was about being Jewish, whether you're in Israel or anywhere else in the world. It was about being Jewish. And the If Not Now comes from a very famous quote that you're all probably familiar with, that famous Hillel quote that says, if I am only for myself, who am I? If I am, it says, if I am not for myself, who am I? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So that's where the name of If Not Now comes from, is the Hillel quote. I love that quote because it just seems so true, right? Like, yes, you have to stand up for yourself. Yes, you have to stand up for other people. And if, when are you going to do it? When there's pie in the sky, or you're going to do it now? Know yourself and be in solidarity, both and, not either or. Hillel said it thousands of years ago, literally over 2,000 years ago. And this group that's about 10 years old named itself after that. Now, Jewish Voice for Peace, JVP, many people have heard about it in very nasty contexts of that's the, the evil boogeyman in the Jewish world now. Not that many people in the mainstream Jewish community have actually checked out what is JVP. And JVP, like any Jewish group, has evolved. It's about 15 years old. Again, it's a very Jewish group. practicing Judaism in all sorts of different ways, but it is not Judaism focused on Israel. In fact, it's anti-Zionist, and its main purpose is to stand as Jews, to stand with the Palestinians in the Palestinian movement to be free, but to do it as Jews. So like to do it through Hanukkah, through Passover, like to live a Jewish life that isn't focused on Israel and is focused on the Jewish value of everybody needs to have a life that they can live inside Israel or outside. But in this case, it's focused on Palestinian freedom. So that's a really unique place in the sort of ecology of Jewish groups, if you think about it. So in the ecology of Jewish groups, there's many different groups. There's the ADL, there's AIPAC, there's all the sort of institutions like synagogues that mostly are about creating Jewish life in this country, but some of them have a perspective on Israel. And then there's Jewish Voice for Peace at one end, if not now, and many, many other groups that can fill in that spectrum. But JVP is definitely at one end of it in that it's anti-Zionist, pro-Judaism. It's all Jews who are enacting and practicing passionate Judaism, including many, many rabbis. But and JVP is the fastest growing Jewish group in the nation and is extremely well funded by its own base of people who make individual donations. It doesn't get mostly foundation money, or it's not supported by the sort of the, it's like it doesn't get Israel bonds, or it doesn't get, sort of like established Jewish institutional support at all. So anyway, that's that's the spectrum. And today we're just looking at that place on the spectrum. And remembering, I spoke at High Holy Days about some of the ways that the Jewish community has not noticed the solutions that come from the edge on things like gay rights, the right of women to be leaders in the Jewish community, those kind of things, until there's a process of education and evolution. Well, right now, JVP is at the edge in that way, but generationally, it's kind of like probably what's going to be in the future if you just look at the way these kind of things work, because JVP is holding some truths that haven't yet been integrated into the typical Jewish education and synagogue life and whatever. So when you went to the website, let's just start with JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace. Anybody who recently visited the website or did it in preparation for this class, what were the facts that you saw there? Not your opinion or interpretation, but what did you actually see there? Anybody? Fran?
They listed how many people have died. I think they said 46,000 Palestinians, 1,000 Lebanese, and they said 1,000 Jews, which sounded under. Didn't include the IDF.
I thought it were killed. Right.
Yeah, it didn't. It said Israelis. It didn't include soldiers.
Okay, so there's data about deaths there, and I'm sure it's updated regularly because the situation is still unfolding. Okay, great. That Fran did a great job putting a piece of data out there about a description of what she saw there. Who else? Anybody who can multitask on screens is welcome to go right now to the JVP website. Ellen, what did you see?
Yeah, there's kind of a call that if the Biden administration would stop sending weapons to Israel, that this would be, kind of a call for the Biden administration to cease the weapons to Israel at this point in time, and that this could have been avoided or at least ended significantly sooner if that had actually happened.
Okay, so thank you. A call to stop sending weapons. And what else? Fran?
I think there was something about Senator Bernie Sanders's bill that he introduced about to stop sending weapons. Same sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
It was interesting that as soon as I turned on the television today, Meet the Press was interviewing Bernie Sanders.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, anybody else? Amy.
Well, and they talk about not supporting the ADL and understanding the ADL is not about anti-Semitism, but to the extent to which local school boards, local communities, a lot of people work with use the ADL as like their moral compass, and that it's really not a civil rights group, that it's really a pro-Israel lobbying group.
Thank you, Amy. And so that sounds like it's that website is making a distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Just saying. Yeah. I think that's Paul there, right? Paul?
Well, I was just looking at it. It looks like they're saying there's no consequences for Israel from the United States, no sanctions, nothing that's going to impede their motivation to keep fighting. I mean, whereas other countries, what we do is like if it's Iran or anywhere else, we will, let them feel our wrath kind of. But it's almost saying from what I just read, even that we're, they can do whatever they want, and we sort of sit back and watch, is what I was seeing.
So Biden can say what we want is a ceasefire, but there's no consequences if there
Yes.
isn't cooperation and moving towards.
That's right. There's no repercussions basically from us that would cause them to consider not doing that. We're just sort of sitting by, and it looks like that. It's not like we are. I know Blinken has been very involved in the whole thing, but it almost looks like they're not getting pushback from us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, unless anyone has anything else to describe from the JVP website, let's move on to the If Not Now information. Does anyone have anything else for JVP for the moment? Okay, let's do If Not Now then. What did you see on that website? Okay, well, I will just put in that If Not Now's big campaign in recent months has been to track the money that comes from AIPAC, because AIPAC raises a ton of money. It's very rich, and it has a very strategic political Zionist in support of Netanyahu role in the ecology of these foreign relations from our point of view, like trying to influence money going to support Netanyahu for better or worse, trying to support the settlers for better or worse. It's a very kind of Zionist, and not just Zionist, but really right-wing Zionist organization. And I think many people in this room have expressed very much distress about Netanyahu as a elected person, and they are very much in support of Netanyahu's policies and of candidates in this country and elected leaders in this country who will continue to pour that support in, basically for the settler movement, which elects Netanyahu. So that has to do with campaign funding. So it's like a follow the money campaign for If Not Now. Like, notice who's influencing who. Is that really what you want to do? Because people think AIPAC, oh, it's a Jewish lobbying group, but it's actually what they're showing in this kind of tracking it and tracking the money is what is being done with all that tons of money that AIPAC is raising. So that's what If Not Now is doing. Anybody else on If Not Now? So the difference between the two groups is that they're both Jewish groups filled with passionate Jewish leaders of all kinds. JVP is anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian. If Not Now is non-Zionist and pro-Palestinian. And they're both enacting Judaism. They're both very Jewish. So did you notice anything on JVP or If Not Now's in their material about actually celebrating Judaism? Okay, so or if anybody's seen, like, I don't know if you remember when there was the encampment at Penn for people who read local news. You heard about like different Jewish groups. It was both JVP and If Not Now doing like a Jewish Seder, but also talking about Palestinian freedom at the Jewish Seder. And, they celebrate Shabbat. They do things according to the sacred cycle of the year around the holidays. I've been to various events, and one thing that's been moving to me is seeing all these young people pouring into these groups because they're very upset and activated around what's happening in Gaza right now. But what they are also seeking is a way to be Jewish. And like to see people like leading Shabbat for the first time or trying to tell Torah stories that they're vaguely familiar with, and they go out and learn more to be able to tell it. I mean, to me, it's very moving. It's a whole generation that's kind of finding their way into Judaism because these groups offer a way to celebrate Judaism as diaspora Jews, not as focused on Israel and Zionism, but as sort of saying, and that's a very tried and true Jewish like kind of stance, is that we should be able to be Jewish wherever we are, not just in one country called Israel. And we need to really bolster, enrich, thriving diaspora Judaism. So they're both living Judaism, and they're also challenging Zionism. Either in the case of If Not Now, by simply not participating in pro-Israel things, or in the case of JVP, of actually being against a nation state that's just Jewish, like an ethnocentric. It's kind of like the, like the caliphate running the country. So with second-class citizens and whatever. Anyway, I'm just right now outlining the description of what these groups are. And I do see some hands. So, okay, Phil.
Thank you. I'm listening to all this, and I'm so interested in this feeling of separateness in all of these groups, no matter what their approach, it's us versus them. Paul and I have watched a number of Israeli movies, modern ones, that really have characters living their lives together and wanting more and even being involved with each other in relationships and wanting the barriers knocked down that separate them. And I wonder if there's a point of view like that out there where it's more about, can we live together as human beings, and how similar the cultures are. I grew up during the ecumenical movement in Christianity, which reached out and tried to connect the Jewish and Christian and Muslim together because they were all related. And that point of view doesn't seem represented today, from what I can see in terms of organization. I don't know. I'm just sort of asking.
Yeah, that's, thank you. Okay. Paul.
Well, it's interesting. I remember going to Israel, and I felt that interchange of the Palestinians and the Israelis. I think there were less borders. I know that you could come and go, and I don't want to, I didn't know everything about it, with more, it's almost like if you needed to see someone at one of the hospitals in Tel Aviv and you were a Palestinian, you could. I mean, if you got better health care, or you could, some of the people went to school. It's unfortunately most of the Israelis the Jews did not want to go to school in, the Palestinian region. But it's almost like I think what changed that, which we can't forget, is all of the terrorist attacks, the bombings in the buses, the people sitting in a cafe and having somebody blow themselves up. See, I think that working as a therapist for so many years, when you are trying to be a survivor and you try to figure out how to live in peace with anything around you, and at some point, from what I do understand, Israel has had to become much more aggressive. And even when they train everybody in the country for war, it really has an impact on the humanity there. And so I do feel like that's what's so hard about all this, is I can understand that their line in the sand is that, if we are going to survive as individuals and as a people, we have to fight like hell. And even though nobody cares and nobody supports us, screw you. And so I think that it's so tragic. And yet, even if you just pulled away and saw it as somebody who was experiencing PTSD, and now this country has PTSD, Israel, and they're not doing well with it. I wish I could say, they're handling it. No, they're struggling to figure out how to get through it, but they're also probably not being low key and grounded. Yeah, whatever you say, well, we're going to consider your point of view. No, it becomes more and more, we're doing this so we can live and our grandkids can live. And so that's why it's difficult. It's because I do see, as a clinician, the PTSD is palpable among the entire people. And that didn't exist before, when they meant well and they wanted to have harmony, even though what you're saying is true, that they displaced, huge numbers of people to say it's now our land. So that part I don't want to lose, but I hate to say it, that there's no easy solution to a group of people now that are traumatized and trying to navigate through all this craziness,
Thank you for that, Paul. And that's a real kind of clinician's perspective on this situation. I think it's really important. Thank you for that. Okay, let's have one more comment if there is somebody who would like to weigh in here. Okay, so I just want to kind of respond to the comments by saying, I think there's a very human, beautiful yearning. Why can't we all get along? We want to do, why can't we work this out together? And you have to add, if that's a beautiful thing. And I see people in this room like, why can't we do that? And there certainly have been people in all parts of the Middle East who also have had that yearning. I think you have to add into the picture the question of power. There's a human yearning, we should all get along. But if you think about the Jim Crow South, okay, where Black people, such as in occupied territories, but there it was the occupied South, couldn't vote, couldn't be elected to be decision makers, had to defer to white people on the street. And so there was the whole economy that made Black people second-class citizens. In Palestine, people have different access to water. Like Palestinians get way, way less water than Jewish people. Have to travel on separate roads with there's reasons for all this, but still you have to put the power piece in. Like, it's hard to have equal cooperative relationships when some people are being occupied by other people. And in this case, bombed, with the Gaza war, bombed and killed and having the infrastructure destroyed and whatever. So I get that human yearning to just get along. And I also get that I think we'll be able to get along when we figure out a way where everyone can be safe and free as equals. And I don't think we're anywhere near that right now. I very much agree with Paul's trauma analysis there. But it might be a multi-generational effort, but I don't think we're going to have peace in that area of just cooperative caring relationships across lines of difference until we also have equality, like justice, where people can, everybody can choose the leaders and everybody can, share the land, not having an apartheid occupied part of the situation. So, Nancy?
Yeah, can you address the impact of evangelical Christians in this whole miasma?
Yeah.
And what they want and how that impacts what Jews and Israelis want?
Really good question. When you look at the politics of the United States' role in the Middle East, the evangelical Christians are probably the most important part of that analysis. If you think about, okay, Jews have been powerful, not pulling the puppet strings in any kind of protocols of Zionism way, but Jews have had good luck in this society and have thrived and have money as a group and have, definitely tried to influence the politics of the land through things like AIPAC. But if you look politically at where Jews are in the country, we're mostly in Florida and New York. Those are the places where Jews can actually win elections because Jews as a group act together. And mostly politically, the Jews are not actually what's electorally influencing the Middle East. There's a little bit more Jewish funding that does influence United States policy. But who's really influencing it is the evangelical movement, which is all over the heartland of America and beyond. And an enormous number of voters are evangelicals. So there's a huge amount of influence from evangelicals. And the theology of the evangelical movement is that the Jews should return to Israel, like the Jews should be gathered in by God, because that's the beginning of the apocalypse that we all long for. So the evangelicals are very, very supportive of Israel. And I'm not saying every individual evangelical, but as a movement, a very strong position of support for the nation of Israel, for whatever government's running Israel, right now for Netanyahu. And the theology is that get all the Jews there. We want the Jews to go there, and then we will all be lifted up in the end of times. And that's what they need to be lifted up into the end of times. They need the Jews to be there first, because that's their theology. Bring the Jews back home. The Jews are the chosen people. That's the first step of end times. And so they're very, very supportive of seeing to it that there is a way for that to happen. I don't think they have the Jews' interest at heart here. This is Christian theology that is influencing our government about how we, as the United States, engage in the Middle East. But it's very, very powerful. Bobby.
Could you clarify, like, once we Jews are there, are they hoping or believing that we should convert in order to have the Messiah come? Or what is the relationship between the Jews and Christians in this apocalypse?
They don't need us to convert because Jews are the chosen. I sometimes have Christian clergy people who meet me and they say, I'm so glad to meet a member of the chosen people.
We lost your voice.
Christians. They have a
Julie, your sound is all of a sudden the volume dropped way low.
Although I can't.
Wait, Mom. We can't hear you.
Mom? Whoops. You know what? This is so weird. What is going on here?
Your volume dropped way down.
You guys, I am teaching. Can you? I'm going to end this. Somehow called in by accident and started talking to me. I apologize. I don't even know how that technology happens. How weird. Anyway, that was Zoe and Rosie Greenberg. Okay.
We missed what you said.
Okay, what was I saying? I was saying, no, the fundamentalist Christians, the evangelical movement, do not need the Jews to convert to Christianity. The Jews are God's chosen people. We get to be Jewish and we get to be gathered into the Holy Land. And I was saying I sometimes meet Christian fundamentalist clergy people who say to me, I'm so glad to meet one of the chosen people. So, they really hold this theology and they think we are the chosen people. They're happy about us. So I mean, they're also happy to proselytize and have people convert, but not especially the Jews. They would like everybody else to especially convert because we play a role in their theology of going back to the land of Israel, being gathered up from the four corners of the world. And that's the beginning of the end of times that they all hope for, because that's how you have the second Messiah kind of run the world. Bobby.
I know we're kind of going off on a tangent here, but I have such trouble with that whole philosophy, white Christian nationalism philosophy.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin. Because it sounds like they want to get rid of us. They want us all to go to Israel. Not that they want to annihilate us, but they want us all to go there. And
Right.
isn't that getting them out of here? And doesn't that, to the extreme, doesn't that fall in line with the Jews will not replace us rhetoric?
Dang.
Yeah. So it just, and it's totally against the whole diaspora thing, movement, whatever, that's been happening for hundreds of years now.
That is a perfect segue. Thank you, Bobby.
Anytime. Phil has
saying,
his hand up too. I don't know if you want to.
Okay, we'll see. We may have time for more discussion, but I just want to add in a couple other things here. So we here in this Zoom room are all diaspora Jews. We are Jews who are making our life not in Israel, but in some other part of the world where we want to be part of a really robust Jewish community. We're not saying, oh, we're going to hang out here till we can get to Israel and then we can be Jewish. We're saying we are Jewish here. We want to be safe. We want to be respected. We want to be able to create Judaism for the future, celebrate what we've inherited, bring it into the future. That's what we want here in the diaspora. And there are diaspora Jews all around the world. And actually, for most of Jewish history, diaspora Judaism was Judaism. There was a tiny remnant living in Israel always, like Jews are indigenous in the land of Israel. But it was a tiny little remnant. Jews dispersed, and rarely where Judaism was, kind of developing and creating and living into the future was in places like Babylon, for instance, in ancient times. As you go through all the places that Jews settled, Baghdad, Morocco, I guess I should cities or states, I'm conflating here, but what we would now call Iraq. These weren't separate nations at the time, but Baghdad, various places in Morocco. I think some of you have been there. I think Fran's been there. I've been there. Maybe some other people have. Spain, Phyllis and Natan came from a big journey to Spain. So that was a huge center of thriving Judaism, diaspora Judaism. Alexandria, Egypt was a center of thriving Judaism. All through Eastern Europe, there were Talmudic academies and people generating, Jewish rules for how to live life, and midrash and great academies of teaching. So most of Judaism for 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years really, or about 2,000 years, it wasn't taking place in the land of Israel. And many Jews throughout that whole time didn't want to focus just on the land of Israel. They wanted to be safe and functional in the places they were with their Jewish communities. If you really think about it, I mean, how many of you would be very happy if your kids or nephews or whatever moved to Israel? I mean, you don't have to really answer this, but I mean, a lot of American families, they might love Israel, go visit Israel, maybe even retire for a few months a year in Israel, but you have a whole family here. And you probably belong to a community here where these are your people. And diaspora Judaism has been the main Jewish experience all around the world for thousands of years. And in fact, Zionism as a political movement to move all the Jews back to Israel was very recent in human history. And it was never a majority movement of Jews until after the birth of Israel. prior to the birth of Israel, prior to 1948, Zionism was not the majority Jewish opinion in actual Jewish communities around the world. A lot of people didn't think it would be a good idea because they thought Jews would be less safe if everybody thought, well, really, you belong in Israel. Why don't you go to Israel if you want to be Jewish? You're not really American or German or this or that. So a lot of Jewish people, a lot of Jewish leaders thought Jews would be less safe if there was an Israel, and that there would be less resources devoted to Jewish communities all around the world because everybody would start focusing on Israel, which is what happened. But it was not a majority movement. And there were many other strands of ideas, like many other movements and ideas about how to be Jewish in the diaspora that were not focused on Israel. And I actually think that it would be really interesting for us to follow up this class by studying one of those other strands. So for instance, I imagine a lot of us have ancestors who were Bundists. The Bundists were based all over Eastern Europe in the early part of the 20th century, and they were diaspora Jews. They were not Zionists. They did not want to join the political movement to move everybody to Israel. And instead, they wanted to make life safe and good all through Eastern Europe. And they were an enormous movement pre-Holocaust. I've just been reading a history of the Bundists. It's very fascinating. They wanted diaspora Judaism to work, and especially they were involved in the labor. They were all Jewish, and they were the labor movement in those parts of the world. So they were not fascists as the Nazis began to rise. The Bundists were anti-Nazi, and they were also not communists. So as the Soviet Union began to rise, they did not like that way of life either. They were like kind of democratic labor people all through Eastern Europe who acted as Jews in their communities. It's very, very interesting. They had the slogan, "Let culture thrive here." And this was the time when some people were becoming political Zionists, trying to organize all the Jews to move to Israel. And they presented a very different, substantial movement. So, and also the Hasidic Jews, which were a different response to modernity, they, until after 1948, they weren't Zionists. They had thriving, amazing dynasties all over Eastern Europe, different Hasidic dynasties. They were the ones doing mystical Judaism, following the Baal Shem Tov and generations of disciples. And I draw a lot on that in things we do here because I think so many of the teachings are very beautiful Jewish teachings. But they wanted to create life where they were. And now, after the Holocaust, some of them relocated their dynasties to Israel and now are usually pretty right-wing, but some of them are still not Zionists. They won't go into the military. They don't believe in the nation of Israel. They do believe in Jews being safe and developing Judaism, but quite a few of them they're actually anti-Zionist Hasidic people living in Israel because they don't want a nation that's Jewish. That's a whole different thing to have a nation state. That's different than having Jewish people be able to develop Judaism, which they do want. Really interesting. There's just so many complex nuances in this. I do want to do two other things, though, in this class before we end. And one of them is, this is hard stuff. It's really hard stuff. And again and again, I hear the deep yearning amongst people like us that we just want a Jewish democracy over there in the Middle East. We want a Jewish democracy. That concept has deep roots. It's got deep current interconnections. It's very meaningful. It was a dream. And it turned out that when you occupy another people and when you have a Jewish ethnocentric state, you can't have a Jewish and democratic state. It turns out with more education. Now, you could still say, well, then we want a Jewish state. We won't have a democracy. We'll have a set of second-class people because they're not necessarily going to vote for the Jewish way of doing things. But we will have a Jewish state. Or you could say we'll have a democratic state of Jews and Palestinians who live together and we'll figure it out. But the sad thing is that we have to mourn is that even though we yearn for it and want it, and it was a totally, well-intentioned idea, you can't have a Jewish state in a land that's also shared by people who aren't Jewish, because you can't have a Jewish democratic state because you won't have equality if it's a Jewish state. So I just think that's the most painful thing for this generation to wrestle with. But I think it's what we have to wrestle with. And it's really difficult and it's really painful, and it really involves the loss of a certain kind of dream. But I think as we heal that loss, we will be more able to not live in the trauma of the very, very hard things our people have been through, and also to recognize the very, very hard things the Palestinians who live in that land too have lived through. And as Paul offered to us, when we heal from trauma, we can face the future with more flexibility, creativity, new solutions, and not stay locked into the past of, but we want a Jewish state, Jewish democratic state, which is just not something that can be. We now understand. You can still choose either side of that. You can choose, okay, well, still, I want to fight for a Jewish state, whatever that means. That is a valid position, and many people are taking that position because it's so important to have a Jewish state to them, which is actually akin to the, when the Islamic states, they're going to have an Islamic state, and it's just going to be Islamic, not democratic. And that is a choice, and it's a possibility. But to give up the loss of a Jewish democratic state, I think speaks so deeply to us in this room, because we value both of those core desires, and to then figure out where we're going from there. Just a reminder, it's not us who are going to solve the problem in the Middle East. So it's not on that level. It's more like, what will you vote for about like where our American tax money goes, that kind of thing. Like, we certainly have a role in this, but it's not up to us here to solve the problem of what happens in the Middle East. And I want to do a check-in like we've been doing, since this is really hard stuff and it does involve loss and wrestling with things we wish we didn't have to wrestle with, on how safe do you feel and how comfortable do you feel, and really building our muscle to distinguish between feeling safe versus feeling comfortable. Feeling safe is really, being safe is a really important thing. So, and we won't always be comfortable within that safety. So we're going to do the fist to 5 again. It's just going to be impressionistic. I never did do visual access, so I will say right now we have about 25 boxes in our Zoom room, including some of them with double people in them. So at 25 people. And really, a real diversity of where people are coming from. And I so appreciate that pluralistic reconstructing Judaism ability to stay in a space and listen to each other and wend our way forward together. So, fist to 5, how safe do you feel? 5 is the most safe. Hold your hand up. I am seeing a range, I think, of many 5s, and also a not safe at all, and a safe 3 or 4. So
safe in what way, Julie? I'm unclear.
That you get to decide that for yourself.
I don't know what safe means. Where?
Okay, so you get to decide about safe, because that's an assessment to make for you. So whatever safe at this moment means to you in this space, like right here in this Zoom room with these people, is what I mean.
Oh.
Yeah. So I see a real range of safe here. So I'm going to ask a couple people to narrate why you're landing where you land. So can everybody hold up their hands again so I can just see one more time? Bobby Cohen, can you narrate from a 5 point of view, how you're choosing that? But you're on mute, Bobby.
Thanks. I feel safe in this community, having this discussion. I feel safe because of the bubble we live in Philadelphia.
Oh,
It's not to say that I've never experienced anti-Semitism. I have, but it's not been of a violent criminal nature. So from all those things, I feel safe. And I'm also grateful that I feel safe within my family, my extended family.
Thank you. Lenore, would you be willing to narrate a 3? Can you unmute?
yeah, it's actually a 4.
Oh, 4. Okay, narrate a 4.
Okay. Okay. I feel very, very safe when we are together in this room. Absolutely. But I've noticed the last couple of years when there's a large Jewish event going on in the city, I'm talking especially at the Kimmel Center. There's things that, and I feel, I don't feel safe. I thought, what if something will happen? What if someone comes in here with a bomb? What if someone would, my mind just goes like that, just goes off. And I think it's because we've heard so much that is going on in this country. Yes, Philadelphia is great. I usually feel safe, but it's when I go to a big event and I'm beginning not to go.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Lenore. Thank you. And Ed, do you want to?
Well, I had a 3 and then a 4 when you clarified this space, this Jewish space. And in large and small Jewish communities, I've found we as Jews as a whole tend to sometimes silence others. Particularly, there are religious and political orthodoxies, and whether it's historical or it's textual. There have all my life been questions that I found it difficult to pursue in Jewish settings, particularly the ones that are patriarchal. And so I feel a slight discomfort, even in here. I gave it a 4 instead of a 5.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, so that was how safe you feel. Now it's how comfortable you feel. Fist to 5. And we're just going to notice what we're seeing here. I am seeing, let's see, I am seeing, Paul, are you putting a fist up of some kind? All right, you're kind of thinking about it. Okay, and some people aren't on camera, but I'm seeing 4s, 5s. I'm seeing a 2, a 3, a couple 3s. So I'm seeing a range. Okay, a bunch of 3s and a bunch of 2s and a bunch of 5s. Okay, thank you, folks. We are going to stop in a minute. We're going to do our Torah learning song together, as we always do. And then my final question is going to be, what do you want to learn from here? And I'm going to ask you either, Diane, I hope you're willing to take this input, either email it to Diane as chair of our education committee, or you can put it in the chat box here if you have access to the chat box, or you always know where to find me. But we're very interested in what else do you want to learn? Because we do these series, and you could choose something in this area that we've been talking about or in any other area, but it'd be really good to get the input. What do you want to learn? So let's do our song now. For our teachers and our students and the students of our students, we ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. Bobby, do you have a couple announcements?
Just real quick, first I want to thank you for this wonderful series, Rabbi Julie. It was really enlightening and interesting. And Ellen, I do see your message in the chat, and it was wonderful having you, and you're welcome to join us anytime for anything. And I'll see some of you this afternoon at choir practice, so look forward to that. We have Shemanu this week, and the next event would be on Monday the 23rd, a week from tomorrow, when we have our book discussion on inheritance. So I hope some of you will be there for that. It's an interesting book. And I'll just
we have a
Hanukkah.
really fun Hanukkah party
We have a
coming.
really fun Hanukkah party coming up. So come and eat and laugh and play, whatever, on the 31st from 4 to 6. Yeah, Ellen, you're welcome. At the William Penn House Community Room. Please register. You can register on our website. I'll be sending more reminders, I'm sure. We need to have an idea of how many people so we can set up the room appropriately and so we can buy enough latkes.
And if you're coming, bring your Hanukkah, your menorah with some candles and something to light with, because we're going to bring a ton of light into the world.
Yeah, and you're also welcome if you're so inclined. It's from 4 to 6 in the afternoon. If you want to bring your own dinner to have with latkes, we're welcoming people to do that just like we do on Friday nights. No requirement, but if you'd like to, we can sit there and schmooze over a meal.
And we're making it really easy for our people at 1919 Chestnut, the William Penn House. So I really hope to see you as anchors for the event.
Yeah.
All right.
And,
Love
and Jeff, it's on the 31st. It's New Year's Eve, but 4 to 6 in the afternoon.
Yeah, I hope you can come, Jeff and family. That would be great.
That would be great. And that's about it for me. Thank you all for coming.
Somebody could probably offer Jeff's family a parking voucher for that garage too.
Oh, thank you.
If he can come. Okay, the date is December 31st from 4 to 6 at 1919 Chestnut Street, which is called the William Penn House, and it has a garage, and some of our people live there. So there is parking in the building with a coupon.